You are at the July meeting of the Silicon Valley Mac Users Group, and we are honored to have Chuck Joyner with us again and Adam Engst joining as well. And I'm absolutely, Adam, I don't remember you ever having presented for us. I'm delighted.
Don't think I have, actually. I mean, I will admit there's so many, letter mugs that I sometimes get them mixed up, but nonetheless, I don't believe so.
And I think that is because of our Monday meeting. Our constant,
Mondays are a little tough for me usually.
Yeah, I think that's why. So I'm delighted, and we will go ahead and I'll hand it on over to Chuck, and Chuck, you can go ahead and start however you like. I'm going to mute myself in the meantime here.
Okay. Welcome to Mac Voices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, I'm privileged to have with me tonight Adam Engst of Tidbits. Adam, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Chuck. That's always nice, and especially when we're at 10 p.m. on a Monday night when I'm frankly a little fried.
Well, and we're also both very honored because we are with the Silicon Macintosh User Group out of California, and they asked us to speak to them virtually via WebEx tonight. So what the folks after the fact may see may look a little different, and that's because we're using WebEx tonight. So, but Silicon Mac, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. It's very nice of you to.
So this is SVMUG Silicon Valley, and they're having us.
Silicon Valley.
They're coming all the way to the East Coast to pick up something. Come on, there's got to be someone in Silicon Valley.
I think they're desperate for speakers.
Yeah, clearly.
So they asked us to talk a little bit about WWDC and the announcements that happened there. And I always kind of enjoy these discussions that happen 3-4 weeks after the fact, because we sort of are over that giddy, oh my God, I can't wait to get my hands on it. And we've had a little time to think about it and ascertain what's important, maybe what wasn't. So I know where I want to start, but I'm going to ask you, Adam, to take us out first. What do you think was the most important thing or the most important things announced?
Oh, from me, it has to be Apple Silicon. That, the fact that Apple is going to be going through a third processor switch from obviously Intel chips to Apple's own chips, which are ARM-based, and probably, they're going to be Mac specific, but they're clearly going to be based on the same kind of architecture as is used for the iPad and the iPhone. That's just huge. I shouldn't say that. It's huge in some ways, and it would be completely unnecessary in others. That users won't see in some ways won't see a thing. It'll just be a Mac. It'll keep working.
Okay, we got a little crosstalk, but that's okay. Jose apparently is. Hello, Jose. Welcome.
There we go.
Yes.
So any event, so Apple Silicon's is my vote for the big thing that is really going to be, as I said, on the one hand, changing everything and hopefully changing nothing. For as Mac users, hopefully we'll just be able to keep being Mac users.
I'm a little surprised, and I'm really pleased because we both agree that that's the big story.
Oh, come on, we always agree now.
Well, we don't always agree, but I guess the reason I'm just a little surprised is, and not surprised, that's not right, but it's one of those things that is quite a bit down the road. The earliest we're hearing about this possibly affecting any end user is the very end of the year. And the rumors are rampant about which machine's going to be the first to get the Apple Silicon, and who knows? But it's one of those things that I guess from my standpoint, I feel like this is one more step in Apple's goal to control its own destiny, because we've had a number of Mac models in the past that have not seen refreshes, and a lot of the excuses given were that the Intel chips that they wanted just weren't up to where they needed to be or weren't available yet.
Yeah, and that's a really big deal. And I actually would say that I'm not particularly perturbed that the end of the year is when they're talking about this, because the fact is nothing talked about at WWDC is going to ship until September at the earliest. So, we've been doing this for a long time. I've been publishing Tidbits for 30 years. Another couple of months, yeah, whatever. I can wait. It'll come around. It'll come around. It'll happen. And I'm not too perturbed about that. But you're right that there have been a few models, iMac Pro, certainly the Mac Pro, and before the current incarnation. iMac currently has just been sitting and sitting, where we don't really know why Apple hasn't updated them. But and Apple's not going to badmouth a partner until well, they're probably never going to badmouth a partner. Apple's usually pretty good about that. But at the same time, you have to believe that there's some pretty unhappy people inside Apple if they can't get Intel to do what they want. And Apple's a big enough company that they don't have to put up with it anymore. They're going to be masters of their own destiny, even more so. And that's a nice way to put it. The other way you could put it is Apple's a control freak company, and they need to have their fingers on the pulse of everything they do.
Which is sort of a pretty fair assessment. I think that's sort of generally known.
Yeah, a little control freakery there.
Yeah. And I find it's kind of ironic because I kind of remember when the CEO of Intel came out on the bunny suit at
Paolo
Macworld.
Tellini.
Thank you. I wasn't sure who it was, but he came out and there was kind of a mixed reaction that, this at one time Intel was not exactly seen as the enemy, but maybe as just the other side of the fence.
Well, they were. I mean, there was a reason why it was called Wintel. That it was Windows and Intel on Windows on Intel chips, and that was the alternative. But when Apple switched from the Motorola or from the PowerPCs to Intel chips, they did so because they needed the performance. PowerPC just wasn't providing it, particularly performance per watt. And so, when you look at that, you can see, for instance, we never had a PowerBook G5. There wasn't one. And there was a reason for it. And that was the power per watt problem. That there were G5s, they were powerful. That was not the issue. The problem was that you couldn't get one that would actually hold a battery charge for any amount of time. And so, that was a big deal. And so I think it's in many ways exactly the same story all over again, that Apple wants chips that are going to give them the most power for the most CPU power for the least battery power. And that is something which Apple now has a tremendous amount of in-house knowledge and skill in doing, because they've been doing it for the iPad and the iPhone for years now. And every now and then they talk about like this the performance levels of one of their chips, and it's really pretty impressive. They're not quite as comparable to Intel stuff as they might be, because Apple's doing a lot of what Apple's doing is custom to Apple's operating systems. They're making custom chips for exactly what they want them to do, which is brilliant on their part, of course. And it's something they've never been able to do on the Mac, where they're basically stuck with stock Intel chips.
And I have to admit that Jeff Gammon had to point out to me that Apple's been doing this already with the iPhones and iPads. I had not thought about it exactly that way. So you're right. They sort of snuck it in under the radar on us, that they've been gathering up all this information about usage and performance with a sort of a different platform, but not completely, and certainly different enough to have it make a significant difference.
Right, and very much not a different platform, really. That all of Apple's operating systems use the same kernel, and you can even see this. It was just, I forget which exactly what version number was. One of the one or two releases ago, where Apple did this quick bug fix release and had to update the entire set of operating systems because they all had this particular security flaw. And so, that more so than anything else just showed how all their operating systems have the same core. And when you look at what you do with a custom silicon, is that you can have these custom cores. So we talk about a multi-core processor. Well, that's all fine and nice, but when they don't have to be the same cores. So you've got multi-cores, you can make different ones for different purposes. And so Apple started doing this already with the iPad Pro, where they have, what do they call them? performance and efficiency cores, although as other people call them, fast cores and slow cores. And basically, for something that needs the CPU power, you task the fast cores. For something that doesn't need the CPU power at all, you task the slow cores, which are going to use much less battery. And similarly, they started doing the neural engines and the motion coprocessors, and they're doing all these really specific extra things that do precisely what, in this case, iOS or iPadOS want. And macOS is no different. That there are, custom encryption things that it does and custom machine learning things that it does. And if you can design your own hardware, your software suddenly is a big win. It's just like it's going to be running faster than you could possibly get it running on off-the-shelf hardware.
Going to be building that hardware, as you said, specifically for what you want to do. So if you're not picking on anybody, but if you're Intel, you're trying to serve a lot of customers. If you're Apple, you're only serving yourself as the customer. And so you're cutting that suit to exactly your measurements and nobody else's.
And there's two other sides to it too. Yes, Intel is serving many customers, and let's face it, Macs may be doing well, but there's still a small percentage of the overall PC market. So yeah, Intel, I'm sure, is more than happy to try to do things to make Apple happy. They want to keep a customer, and I'm sure they were trying. But the fact is that Apple is still, call it 10% of their market. I mean, I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it's certainly, not going to be much more than that given Apple's overall market share. So that's one thing. Second thing is that Apple no longer has to pay Intel. So chips are high margin products. So Apple was paying a fair amount for those chips, which don't cost that much to make. And so now Apple can go to Samsung and TCMC, I think it is, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, which are the two companies that do, they basically are independent fabs. So they will make chips on spec for you. You tell them what to do, they give you a chip. Much cheaper to do that than to pay Intel to do it. Intel has their own fabs and has a hefty markup. So Apple's also in a situation where, let's face it, Apple's financial growth is slowing, and they're trying to find more revenue wherever they can. This has got to be a good place to get more revenue. Suddenly, if you can make an extra, $30 or $50 or $100 per Macintosh just by switching the CPU out, that's just free money.
Okay, so I'm going to take this two ways. The first one is internal. Does this lend any credence to the fact, not the fact, it's not a fact.
The speculation
the speculation that the two operating systems, or the three operating systems, iOS, iPadOS, and macOS, are converging.
Well, put it this way. Apple always says no. And I think that's a fair statement. I actually, I heard an interview with Greg Joswiak, who's a high-end marketing guy at Apple, and he made the very simple point that Apple has two markets in the iPad and the Macintosh, and why would they get rid of one of them? Right? I mean, if you've got two profitable business lines, it has to be somehow incredibly worthwhile if you're going to merge them and then only have one business line. So it just seems unlikely from that standpoint alone that, what you're doing with a Mac Pro or an iMac even is really different from what you're doing with an iPad. So if you merge them, unless you're going to somehow come up with devices that completely span the entire range from the lowest end iPad to the highest end Mac, you've just cannibalized your own sales. That doesn't make any sense. So from that standpoint, it doesn't make sense. Secondly, not to say that it couldn't happen, but at the moment, you can't develop software for real on an iPad. So if you want to write iPad software or iPhone software, you need a Mac to do it. And it really doesn't seem that Apple is likely to be changing what they do to develop all of their code without having something different. And I mean, let's face it, as snazzy as the iPads are, 12.9 inches is a pretty tiddly little screen. I mean, I'm sitting here with a 27-inch iMac and a 27-inch Thunderbolt display, and let me tell you, every Apple developer is running on something big like that. They're not working on 12-inch, 13-inch MacBook Pro. Developers don't use 13-inch MacBook Pros as their primary development machine. That would be dumb, because small screen, slow processor. They want to throw as much power as they can at that kind of task. So no, I don't see this as being a merging. That said, when you look at the interface of Big Sur and of iPadOS 14 in particular, they're a lot closer than they used to be. But I would actually argue that iPadOS is becoming more like macOS than the other way around. That suddenly, iPadOS is getting sidebars, and it's getting a menu bar in certain cases, and all this stuff. It got the dock. That what they're discovering is that the iPad really is more like a Mac than it is like an iPhone. It started out like an iPhone, right? Remember the original iPad, and we had the scaled up iPhone apps, which look truly horsey. And Apple keeps working to make that better in iPadOS, and they actually even renamed it iPadOS, 13, of course. But the fact is that I think we are seeing them get closer and closer because Apple wants a unified user experience across its entire platform. And some of that is obvious stuff, like every device will have a control center, right? That's going to happen. You've got it from your watch, you've got it on the Apple TV now, you've got it on the iPhone, the iPad, and we're going to have it in the Mac and Big Sur. So, that's the kind of thing where they're going for common approach across the entire ecosystem. And frankly, people have talked about how Big Sur, the interface is a little bit wider and more amenable to a touch interface. It wouldn't surprise me one bit. Every time I use the iPad Pro heavily for a while and then switch to my MacBook, I want to touch the screen. So I could easily see Apple coming up with a touchscreen, particularly laptop, a little less so with a desktop. But that's not too much of a stretch. But it would still be a Mac. It would just have that as an alternative input mechanism.
Wow. That's the one. I was with you right up to that point.
And then I lost you. Yes.
Well, you didn't lose me. It's just I just don't understand it. I have yet to have the desire to touch any screen when I'm using my Macintosh. In fact, I actively don't want to touch it because of the smudging issue. And yet I have Sidecar over on this iPad right here. And so, but that's the iPad, and that is a touch interface.
Yeah, I think it's just what you're feeling used to. And the fact is that there are some things, and what I find is interesting is that, and it really is for me when I switch back and forth quickly. It's like I've just been working on the iPad Pro for an hour or two, and then I open the MacBook for some reason, and a dialog comes up. How come I can't tap OK? Yeah, I'm not saying I want to do text selection with my finger. That's way worse than on a trackpad or arrow keys. We've seen that. There's just some things that don't work as well via touch, and Apple's acknowledged that in part by coming up with the Magic Keyboard for iPad Pro, which has a trackpad, and Logitech's coming up with them for the other devices, the older iPads and things like that. So yeah, there's some things which a trackpad or arrow keys are just better for, but there's some things that touch is just better for. It really is. And I think it's one of those situations where you can't really predict what anyone's going to think. But again, we have decades of experience with mice and trackpads and keyboards. Imagine someone who's, 6, 7, 8 right now and has grown up with touch, and they're going to move to, need to have more powerful software, need to do development or whatever it is. They're just going to be befuddled. Why can't I touch the screen? I've been touching screens my entire life. Why can't I touch the screen on this Mac? I just right there. I just want to touch it once. And, I don't need to do a lot. I just need to touch it right there. And it can't. And I mean, it's fascinating. My son's 21, and And he has different issues, but mostly involving installing Ubuntu and stuff. But he's just, there are things where he's just like, how come Apple doesn't? And I'm like, cause they don't. Like we've seen this for years and years. Something big has to change because Apple just doesn't do things. And touch on a Mac has been one of those things. I mean, Steve Jobs said it. When they introduced, like, we don't think people want to touch the Mac. But I don't know how many years ago that was offhand. I'm guessing it was 2010. So I'm guessing it was 10 years ago when they introduced the iPad. But I'm guessing that will change in the next 5 years. Might not be the first. Might not be the first Apple Silicon Macs, or it might be. I don't know. Just it seems inviting with that new Big Sur interface. But I just have to assume they're thinking about it.
Well, and if we are in an era where we're going to go through the change, and they've said it's going to be a 2-year transition, it might very well be that the new Macs with the Apple Silicon will have that touch interface, or at least the ability to turn it on at some point, whether it's Big Sur or the next OS.
Right. And I mean, and if you think about it, in some ways, okay, so Apple's introducing these new Apple Silicon Macs, and there's one thing that has to be true of them, I believe, is they have to have better performance. So why would you buy a Mac? If you're faced with an Apple Silicon Mac and an Intel Mac, and they have the same level of performance, then it's just like a weird toss-up. But what happened with the Intel switch was the Intel-based Macs were just better. You're like, okay, I want that because it's got so much better performance for the price, or for the battery life, or for whatever. And so so I think they have to have better performance. But something like, the Apple Silicon MacBook Pros, or whatever they end up being called, also have a touchscreen. Well, suddenly that's kind of cool, right? And it's entirely possible that that's one of those things that they couldn't actually do well before without their own custom chips. That to make the performance and the responsiveness and all that, I mean, let's face it, touchscreens on laptops, not new. I mean, they had them for years and years and years. But Apple makes a really big deal about the responsiveness and the accuracy of the touchscreen on the iPads and the iPhones, and particularly when you start using the Apple Pencil. So and I mean, this is going a bit further afield, but if Apple were to make one of those kind of laptops which folds open, so you get like just a screen and you can write on it with a pencil, and then you can fold it the other way and get a keyboard. Not saying they would do that, but suddenly you could see that happening more reasonably if they had a touch interface for macOS, whereas they wouldn't have done it before because it made no sense before.
Right. Okay, so that was the first angle. Now here comes the second angle. Is this, because we were just looking inward, now let's look outward. Does Apple moving to the ARM architecture, do you think this is an industry-leading thing? Do you think there's going to be, assuming that we see the performance kick that we expect to, do you think this is going to drag some of the non-Apple users non-Apple manufacturers to start looking at ARM?
No, I don't. I don't see that as being an issue, because I mean, most of those companies don't have the kind of chip manufacturing, but chip design skills. So I mean, it works for Apple because Apple's been doing it for years, and they know how to do it. They know how to make, design them. They know how to manufacture them. They've been doing this, at high volume. I mean, they sell way more iPhones and iPads than they sell Macs. So I mean, in some ways, the Mac is easy, right? That they don't have to do 50 million of them off the bat. So no, I don't really see that. Plus, Windows for ARM exists, but it's kind of funky, and it doesn't have great compatibility situations. So drivers don't work. Various other kind of protected software doesn't work. I think virtualization is an issue. You can actually go look at it on the Microsoft Windows for ARM site. They have this list of stuff that doesn't work, which is not really a great selling point. And so, and then there's, obviously Linux various variants of Linux for ARM, but those aren't ever going to be mainstream kind of things. Chromebooks, I don't know, Chrome OS feels to me it's probably not worth it because that's more of a commodity market. So they're going to probably go for what's cheapest and, probably like AMD low-end chips in there. So no, I don't see this as changing it. And it wouldn't matter, right? It's not, ARM is not a unified thing. So, ARM is a license. You license it from ARM, or if you're like Apple, you design your own and license some of the intellectual property. And I don't actually know what Apple's situation was. They used to actually be a major stakeholder in ARM, and I think that got sold at some point, but I haven't been able to quite trace it all down. So Apple may even have a different situation where they may have a perpetual license or whatever because of their previous investment. But yeah, it's not, it isn't like Intel and AMD being two companies which are actually competing. That ARM is sort of a different thing.
Before we leave this subject, maybe the most important question of all, is it silicon or silicon?
Apple Silicon.
Apple Silicon or Apple Silicon? Silicon Valley or Apple Silicon? And keep in mind, we're talking to the Silicon Valley Macintosh user group.
That's a good question. I know it's not silicone because that would be implants. So we're not going there yet.
No.
But
I got a dozen jokes, and I'm just not going to use them.
Come on, Chuck.
I'm resisting. I'm resisting the touch interface joke, and I'm not going to use it. Oops.
So in any event, I don't know. I have to go back and listen to what Apple was pronouncing at the WWDC keynote. That's the good question. I mean, when in doubt, go listen to the horse's mouth.
Yeah, good point. So we're going to take a break here and see if anyone has any questions before we start turning to more user-facing things. So if anyone wants to turn on their mics and ask a quick question, by all means. And if not, we'll just keep on going. What could go wrong?
So with the question on separating the OSs, if you've got essentially unified icons, unified interfaces, like the only real difference between an iPhone, an iPad, and a Mac is that you can touch the screen or not touch the screen, where then is the actual, what other difference is there that the Mac OS and the iOS have as a separating thing?
It's the huge layer of middle stuff, right? So you've got the core stuff, which is pretty similar between Watch OS and TV OS and iOS and iPad OS and Mac OS and all that, right? The Darwin kernel and everything. But what comes above that is this huge layer of Mac stuff. So, I mean, that's sort of the whole point. Apple keeps doing their Swift UI and Mac Catalyst of you can get an iPad, you can write and make it easy to port an iPad app to the Mac, but you still get kind of a weak Mac app. I mean, like all of the Catalyst apps that Apple has done have been really pretty lame. And similarly, you'll be able to run iOS and iPad OS software on a Mac running Big Sur on Apple Silicon, but they're going to be an app. I mean, it's not going to be a Mac app. And so if you want to do serious Mac stuff, you're going to be accessing all those APIs that are Mac only. And so, you're not going to see the full-fledged Photoshop or Final Cut Pro or things like that being done with one set of cross-platform software, because every time you do that kind of stuff, you don't end up with something that's any good on any of the platforms. So I think we'll keep seeing the smaller, more focused apps on the iPad and the really big, serious stuff that, again, is able to take on all this extra hardware. I mean, iPads and iPhones don't really do peripherals real well. So, if you want to throw in extra video cards, you want to have a lot of hard drives attached, you want to have, like I've got 3 or 4 microphones attached to my Mac. That's all Mac stuff. The iPad's not going to be able to do that easily. And so we shouldn't get confused that just because they're going to look the same, that the same capabilities. Macs will have a whole lot more capabilities because they're just, more significant machines. I mean, even like if you go up to particularly to the Mac Pro, where you've got all these slots and extra cards you can put in and things like that, completely different beast at that level.
And I'd be I hope that doesn't happen, at least not too soon, because right now you can take things that you can get third-party applications that don't come through the App Store, that don't follow all of Apple's guidelines if you give them the right permissions to do so. And as opposed to something on the iPad or iPhone, where the only way to get something non-Apple approved or non-Apple, what's the word I want? Not filtered, but approved.
Approved,
on there is to jailbreak and
right.
compromise the integrity of the device, which always scares me. I would not.
Never do it.
I have yet to see the utility that makes me want to jailbreak anything I have.
And I mean, you're absolutely right, and I don't see that changing. That the simple fact is, particularly as a development machine, that's where you write your software on the Mac. You get Xcode for the Mac. And so as long as you're going to be able to develop, you need to be able to run anything you want without having Apple approve it in some way, shape, or form. And, there's too much custom software, too much software that's used by, one person, one company, one department, one field, that is just never going to be the sort of thing that can go through Apple and meet all of its requirements. I mean, my favorite example, the piece of software that I wouldn't be caught dead without on a Mac is Keyboard Maestro. So, it's a macro utility. It has to be able to touch everything in sight to be able to automate whatever task you want. And Apple's never going to approve that for the App Store in the sandboxing world. And so that kind of software never going to appear on iOS either, iPad OS, same thing. And so, as long as we are in a conceivable state where people are going to be writing their own software and wanting to do things that Apple hasn't ever anticipated, then we're going to need a Mac to do that on. So yeah, I really don't worry about Macs going away. At least in the 10 to 20 year time frame. I mean, who knows after 10 years, but certainly 5 to 10 years, no, there's going to be Macs the entire time.
Yeah, feels like there should be. So let's start with iOS, because I want to make sure we get to as much as we can here during our allotted time. What are your reactions to the iOS announcements, and specifically the one that I think I'm most excited about next to see it in practice is app clips?
The app clips. Yeah, I mean, app clips, I have to say, I find the concept of app clips to be boring. Sorry.
Really?
I mean, I see the utility of it, and I can think of maybe 2 or 3 times in my life that I would have wanted one. I was parking in Toronto, and I needed to get the Green P app, which is what they use for parking in Toronto, and then I had to fund it. I actually ended up not using it because they wanted me to fund it with $25. And I was like, no way, I'm parking for an hour. I'm not going to pay you $25 to park for an hour when it's going to cost me, 98 or something. So I ended up using the meter normally. And actually, this was the same thing. I was in Atlanta once, and I wanted to try one of those scooters. I'd never tried one of the scooters, and it was the same thing where I had to download the app and set up an account, and they wanted me to fund it to $25. I was like, I want to ride the scooter once. I'm not going to spend $25 for a 10-minute ride once. And then it started to rain, so I had a good reason not to. But so yeah, those were the perfect examples of when app clips would have been ideal, because I wouldn't have had to download an app, I wouldn't have had to set up an account, and I could have used Apple Pay for my $1.25 for a 20-minute ride on the scooter, or to use to be able to use this parking app. So that's where it comes into play. Maybe I'm weird because I don't live in an urban area, and so I just don't run into situations where I need apps to do something that I'm probably never going to do again. And so maybe I'm odd, but even like the car wash that I go to has started using an app instead of putting quarters in, but I'm perfectly happy to get the app because I go to the car wash a couple of times a year. And so whatever, that doesn't bother me. App Clips doesn't seem like it would be a big win there because I'd have to deal with it every time in the same way. So why not have the app? So that's not one of my really big things. Here's where I have to admit it's getting late and I'm starting to blank. I mean, what was the other big things that were in 14? Oh, widgets in the home screen. Yes, I think widgets in the home screen is absolutely brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to that. I have iOS 14 running on an iPhone 7. I had to remember which one it was, and so all you get right now are the Apple widgets, which I find relatively uninteresting. But like as soon as Dark Sky, oh gosh, I hope Apple keeps the Dark Sky app going. I live and die by Dark Sky on my weather, and I hope Apple doesn't screw it up. But now that they own Dark Sky, for people who hadn't noticed the announcement, but that's the kind of thing where I use Dark Sky enough that I would love to have a Dark Sky widget just sitting there showing me the weather. And I would expect it to be done well and things like that. So, I'm really curious to see how that changes things. I really like the idea of the app library at the sort of on the back of the home screen. I think it ends up basically being, because of who I am and what I do. I think I have. Oh, let me look here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think I have 10 home screens, and at least 2 of those are folders. And just full of folders. So I have a lot of apps on my iPhone because I need to look at something to see if it's worth reviewing, or someone want me to test something and whatever. So and then I've got this thing forever. So I think App Library is going to be brilliant for just seeing a list of all the apps that I have alphabetically. And I like the fact that you can hide home screens, but I think that Apple has sort of missed the boat in a couple of ways with this feature, which is it still doesn't help you actually find the app icons wherever they may happen to be on one of your home screens. I can't find. I mean, I actually use the search, so I swipe down and type in app names. For most of my apps, I can't. If they're not on the first 2 screens, I can't find them. I literally don't know where they are, and I have no way of finding them on the home screen, so I have to search for them every time. I can use the app library, but that's not really any better, right? So unless I can use the app library to sort of rebuild a home screen or to find where they are and delete them from the home screen, I'm not sure that's going to be a big help. So I think it's a good start, but I would like to have. I think Apple still desperately needs some way of helping you build home screens that make sense. That once they took that feature out of iTunes, which it wasn't great there to begin with, but at least you had an interface where you could see multiple things at once, multiple screens at once. It just became almost impossible to organize your home screens if you have more than a couple.
Yeah, because as soon as you download an app, it inevitably goes
somewhere.
Else, and you
somewhere.
Gotta go find it, if you can find it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I guess I'm excited over the App Clips idea because I find myself, well, now nobody is out and about as much as you used to be. But
yeah. Well, at home, I've got my App Clip to open the shades.
Yeah. Well, but the idea that everybody has an app, right? Every restaurant chain, everybody has an app, and I don't want all of those apps on my phone. But if I walk in and there's some kind of deal that I can only take advantage of this way, I would love that. And in fact, I'd love to get rid of all those apps and just be able to use App Clips and not have to download the whole thing and go through that. And then, I wake up in the morning and, gee, Chuck, you have 43 apps that need updates. I mean, after a while, that gets kind of tiresome too. So.
I have to admit, I gave up entirely on manual updates because I was like, yeah, I give up. I have 200 apps on this phone. I can't even think about what needs updating. Just do it, and I ignore it. So yeah, I mean, you're right. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that in my life, I don't tend to eat it kind of chains that would have their own apps or things like that. So I don't think it would do much for me, but I could, I said I could, particularly if you're more urban, is quite what it comes down to. And you're more likely to be in places where people are going to say, oh, yes, I'm going to invest the money and the infrastructure necessary to have app clips pop up on people's phones when they walk in my door. So, it just doesn't do a whole lot for the kind of life I live, I guess.
Yeah. And and this once again is sort of the beauty of iOS and the way things are designed, because you can this machine can be whatever you need it to be. If you're urban, if you're rural, if you're a little bit of both, it's great.
Well, and the thing that remember being shocked by is just how different it is. We went to London 2 summers ago for a friend's wedding, and the London Tube, you can pay with Apple Pay, contactless payment, and it was just one of those things where it's like, yes, I just basically wave my phone in the general vicinity of this thing and I'm done. And what was even better is if you use the same payments each time, you couldn't switch back and forth between your phone and your watch. But as long as you use the same device for an entire day, you weren't charged until the end of the day, and then they gave you like the best possible rate. Because no one can keep track of whether or not you're in this zone or that zone, or if it's on peak fares or off peak. No one knows, and so they just gave you the best possible rate. But it was one of those situations where I was like, wow, and of course this is London, so this is millions and millions of people doing this every day. I was like, this is so different for someone like me who lives in rural / suburban / small town area. I don't. There is public transit here. I don't even know if they have an app. I've never taken the bus around here, since I have lived in Ithaca. So there's just no need. So it was an interesting insight into what is a very common experience, but you have to live in the right place.
Agreed. So by my clock, we have just a little bit of time left. So I want to again open it up to questions or comments from anyone, because Adam and I can go for a long time until we
can go until we fall asleep.
Yeah, exactly. But so folks, anything that's on anyone's mind that they'd like to question or comment on?
Yeah, I have a question. When you're talking about touch screens on the Mac, I'm trying to picture. So I'm sitting here looking at 2 27-inch monitors in front of me, which are connected to my Mac Mini, and I'm trying to imagine how this would become touch technology. Would I be willing to move to a much smaller display in order to have touch? Also, it's about arm's length away from me, and so I'd have to lean forward to touch these monitors, and I think that would create some definite physical problems in the long run.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's why when I was talking about that, I was suggesting that it would be on laptops. That I really, as I see your finger coming closer to the screen. No, I don't think that it does make sense for desktop Macs as we are currently accustomed to using them. Microsoft a while ago, what was it called? Chuck, do you remember was it the Surface Pro? They had some some big 27-inch a desktop PC that you worked at sort of like at a drafting table.
Yeah, it looked a lot like one of the HPs. I know which one you're thinking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can see that happening. It's not unthinkable, but it changes. It's such a radical change for workspaces and the way people think about this stuff that I don't see it as being likely. So, yeah, I don't really see the iMacs as being touchscreen. And similarly, if you're running a Mac Mini, you're going to hook up some random monitor most of the time. So it's not going to be touchscreen kind of by default, that it's only going to be Apple hardware. So that's why it feels to me like if Apple did it, it would be in laptops only. And frankly, it'd be a little bit like the Touch Bar, where it could never be the only way of doing something. It would have to simply be an alternative to something you could always do via the mouse. But, I mean, in some ways, the Touch Bar is a good example of where Apple did instead of a touch screen, and it really never went anywhere. That it was just, it wasn't interesting enough. But it wasn't like anything else. Whereas a touch screen MacBook or MacBook Pro would be enough like an iPad, I think, that people would see the utility in it, where they never really did on the touch bar.
And to the gentleman's point, you're going to have to buy new monitors if that's the case. I mean, your iMac, if they did it with the iMac, yeah, great, it would be built in. But if you're getting that secondary monitor, you're going to have to build one that has touch support, whatever that means.
And one thing I don't know, actually, I don't know. I mean, we've never seen big touchscreens. So, like, I don't know if that would radically increase the price also, which seems sort of likely, or that it would basically be problematic. I've never seen a touchscreen that was 27 inches big, short of that Microsoft thing. So, you know.
Well, they had the Surface tables. You remember the Surface tables?
Yeah, but those were low resolution.
Well, because right now there are also plenty of restaurants. I mean, you go to Vegas and everybody has one of those scrolling menus that you could do. But your point is well taken. The resolution on those.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking a high quality monitor. I would worry that to make it a reasonable thing, that it would become radically expensive. So yeah, you're right, absolutely. I don't see touchscreen happening across the entire Mac line. Again, if only because Mac Pros and Mac Minis don't have Apple monitors. So, by default, they might. Apple could come out with a monitor that was actually affordable. Sorry, I'm a little bitter and twisted about a $6,000 monitor, but nonetheless, unless they were to do that, then it's a non-starter as becoming the only way to do something. But that's fine. I'm really okay with touch being something that you get on laptops as an extra way of doing something if you so wish.
Just ignore him, folks. He's still upset over the $100,000 Ferrari.
$6,000. I mean, come on! I have a Thunderbolt 27-inch display sitting next to this beautiful Retina Mac, and since 2014, I have been waiting for Apple to do a 27-inch Retina display that I can hook to my Mac, and so I don't have everything on the other machine that looks worse. It really looks worse when you have them sitting next side by side. And I'm like, just. Every time I look at it, I'm like, not quite as good. Not quite as good. Not.
Take your meds, Adam. Other questions or comments, folks?
Yeah, I got a question. If you go to like Google or Facebook, you'll see a mixture of developers running around campus with Macs or PC laptops and such. But with the transition to a RISC processor, we're going to lose the unfortunate PC on a Mac option. Do you see that hurting?
So yeah, virtualization is the big thing that we lose, and because you used to be able to just run Parallels or VMware Fusion or VirtualBox, and poof, you'd have a PC. And not just a PC. Well, you'd have a PC which could run Windows or Linux or Chrome OS or anything else, and that was great. And that's just gonna be gone. That's not to say that we won't have some sort of emulation environment. So, I mean, we're all old enough to remember the days before Intel when we used to have. Virtual PC. Sorry, I had a brief neuron moment of firing of like, what was the name of it? So yes, we'll be able to emulate that stuff, and we might have enough performance that it's worthwhile to do so. And you're not taking a huge hit if you just need to run that custom app. What you probably won't get is decent performance if you want to do gaming or machine learning or something like that, where you really need to go to the hardware in a big way. There are as a Linux for ARM, there is Windows for ARM, so it's entirely possible that we will have Parallels Desktop or VMware Fusion that will let us access other RISC-based operating systems, which will run some but not all of the Intel-based software that we're used to, because they're designed to do that. So it's a good question, and I don't know. I don't think we'll really know the answer until until the machines come out and until, the people at Parallels and VMware and the open source VirtualBox kind of people, get their hands on it and see what's possible. I'm almost certain that that people will do something. If nothing else, programmers love to virtualize stuff. They love to do that kind of, let's see if I can run this operating system on this other chip that is totally not designed for and still make it useful. So it'll happen, but we won't know until it comes out what's going on and what the trade-offs are. I mean, like virtual PC was a brilliant thing in its time, but it did have some performance issues. So it was great if you needed that custom accounting package for your dentist office or something like that. But no one played games in it.
But also, I feel obligated to point out that we've just been given a minimum 2 years notice that this transition is going to happen. So you've got the programmers have 2 years to figure it out. You have 2 years to figure it out if you are using something that is custom. And frankly, you probably have longer, because when when the vast non-Apple Silicon Mac rolls off the line, you're still going to have years of support for the existing line.
Apple didn't give a specific number for that. I mean, they said, we're trying to have the whole transition within 2 years, but they did say that they would be supporting, Intel chips with Mac OS for many years to come, I believe was the quote. So I would read that into the 4 or 5 more after they stop making them. And you can kind of see that, we lost Rosetta in Lion in 10.7. So Apple will at some point ditch Rosetta 2, which is what they're coming up with to be able to run Intel-based software on the Apple Silicon Macs. So, but it's going to be quite a while. And there's always that simple fact of you can keep using old hardware in the way that it was meant to be used when it was new for quite a while afterwards. It's a little bit harder nowadays due to security and cloud-based stuff. Used to be you could just run old stuff forever because it didn't have to connect to anything. Nowadays, if you don't have a current web browser, after a certain number of years, you lose security certificates and stuff like that, so they become non-functional in other ways. But I really don't see this as being a huge issue, probably for that, again, call it 6 to 8 years from now. By the time Apple gets everything out, makes the switch, and then finally sunsets the old Macs.
Right. Adam, last thing, because we're pretty much out of time, but I wanted to ask, was virtual WWDC a success?
From what I hear, absolutely. And that my understanding is for the developers, actually, they actually preferred the recorded presentations. And part of it was, you could always go, even real WWDC, you could always go back and watch them later. But by not having it be live, they didn't have to be a specific amount of time. You could sort of have this random schedule. If you only need 17 minutes to have your presentation, you don't have to have a 30-minute block. And you're not taking questions and things like that. So, they changed up the way you think about it in terms of watching something that's pre-recorded and then going and asking questions later. Obviously, the keynote was recorded, which I must say just about killed us in taking notes, because they go fast enough as it is, and when they're recording it, I swear they speeded the whole thing up by like 5%. It was just enough so that you couldn't, it didn't sound funny. They didn't sound like chipmunks, but they were talking really fast, and because it was then scripted, there were just no ancillary words, so you didn't get to breathe when you were taking notes. But I think, obviously the people who get to go to WWDC, which is a very small number of people, you have to remember this, that it's, 5,000 or 6,000, but compared to the number of people who want to go, it's a very small number. And so in many ways, this is actually much more, there's a lot more equity there. Everyone was treated the same. Some people didn't get lucky and get to go to WWDC and thus sort of get this advantage over all the other developers who couldn't not even afford to go, but just weren't able to go because it's a lottery system. So, yeah, it's a good question what Apple will do in the future, but I wouldn't be surprised if they kept it virtual. Um, maybe they do, they do the keynote live just as they would do their normal kind of keynote things, and invite media. But yeah, I on the whole, from what I have heard from developers, is they were pretty happy with it. So as long as Apple maintains the interactivity side of it, so you can actually go talk to someone. I mean, I know developers who have literally had like the bug they've been beating themselves over the head with for months, and they win the lottery, get to go to WWDC, and they track down the one guy who they need to talk to and like pin him down for 45 minutes. And usually, and in the stories, it works out. He's like, okay, I see what you're saying. I understand the code. I wrote the code. I am fixing it in the next release. Like sometimes you need that kind of interactivity, and so hopefully that doesn't go away. But apart from that, having a really nice, well done presentation. Although there is the I don't want to say conspiracy thing, but everyone was always like, why do they have certain things on their desks? Like they've got this beautiful, smooth, clean environment, and like the one thing on their desk. So people like trying to read into the tea leaves of why does he have a Transformers robot on his desk, and why does he have a Newton, and so who knows?
I think there's a whole department at Apple that is just tasked with driving us all crazy with those kind of things.
I blame Serenity's Coldwell.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Serenity. Adam, according to Mike Falk, we're out of time. So thank you for being here and doing this. And of course, thanks to the Silicon Valley Mac User Group for having us.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. And I want to say one thing to the group and to the leadership. I congratulate you because you guys are keeping your group going through these tough times with these virtual meetings. I know it's not the same. And I see too many groups that have just suspended meetings and aren't even trying. You guys are trying and you're doing it. And so good job. Keep it up.
Indeed. I mean, from my perspective, it's also just great to be able to come and do these things, like obviously no one's traveling now, but it's hard enough even when times are normal. And so to be able to do this, and it's I guess it's not the same for you not being in the same room, but it is it is not that much different for me. And I really Chuck and I enjoyed being able to talk like this and have more of a live audience and take some questions and things like that. Besides, it gets him off the hook when I sometimes have fun with him otherwise.
Yeah. Adam likes to abuse me. So,
Thank you.
folks, yes, this is Mac Voices. I'm Chuck Joyner. That's Adam Engst. That's the Silicon Valley Mac User Group. Thank you so much for having us. We'll see you next time.